We're talking about one of the greatest public health challenges of our lifetime.
Every day, the pandemic clock is ticking.
Flu is the thing on Earth that is most likely to kill many, many people.
We need a vaccine that is more protective, lasts longer, and will be effective against any influenza virus.
Passionate, talented people coming together just for this cause is what we need to solve this very important problem.
Bringing together people from a wide cross-section of backgrounds and disciplines is the most promising way to bring about significant scientific progress.
By putting together non-traditional ways of thinking, that's how we're going to drive to a faster solution.
Unlike a virus like measles, which if you have a measles virus and you get vaccinated against measles or you get infected with measles, that you are protected essentially for life, for the simple reason that measles doesn't change from year to year or from decade to decade. Whereas influenza is very unique in that it is a virus, a group of viruses. There are different kinds of influenza A, and let's just focus on influenza A, that tend to, we use the terminology, drift from season to season, and that there are mutations that change it enough so that you really need to get vaccinated each year, and you try to anticipate the right match between a vaccine and the virus that will be circulating. And then every once in a while, as Michael alluded to, you have a very dramatic change, either by mutations or by evolutions from animal influenzas that jump species, recombine or what have you, and you have something that's called a shift or a real big change. That's really unique. I mean, the viral infections that we deal with, polio, smallpox, measles, et cetera, don't do that. So we're dealing with a continual moving target from season to season and the threat of a pandemic. So the title of this session is The Quest for a Universal Flu Vaccine. So when we talk about a universal flu vaccine, it really right now is an aspirational goal, in that the quest being to make a vaccine that induces a response in the body to that part of the influenza that doesn't change from season to season, from decade to decade, or even that much when you get a pandemic. And scientists now throughout the country and the world have been able to identify components of the influenza that really do not change much at all. And the critical issue is getting a vaccine to induce a response against that part. Now, a universal flu vaccine is not going to be, today we don't have it, and then we flip a switch, and then next month or next year we have it.
Public health agencies have issued travel advisories, while some countries have banned travel from the worst affected areas. As a result, the travel sector is taking a huge hit. Travel bookings are down 45%, and many flights have been canceled. A ripple effect is racing through the service sector. Governments that rely on travel and tourism as a large part of their economies are being hit particularly hard.
How should national leaders, businesses, and international organizations balance the risk of worsening disease that would be caused by the continued movement of people around the world against the risks of profound economic consequence of travel and trade bans?
If there's some sense that there's a UN institution that can do all of this, then I worry we're suffering from a delusional disorder on the power of the UN. It's really important to get those industries and their trade associations and an efficient leadership established, which is decentralized, but has a collective responsibility and accountability. And that needs to be supported by the public leadership.
What is essential, what is non-essential travel, we have to clarify this. Otherwise, if we go down to 20% bookings over a long period, the company will run down. That's a fact.
You know, there's a whole complex set of issues in a highly interdependent world on supply chains that are just in time. We need to think about how much flex there is in that just-in-time supply chain system and make sure it keeps running. I think it's going to take specificity, and it's going to take knowledge that only the private sector has. The UN can play an important coordinating facilitation role, but the companies know where those commodities are, where they move, how to move them, and that's where a type of public-private collaboration that we have not generally had in these crises needs to be put together pretty quickly.
We are not out of money, yet. But the fact is we are trending in a dangerous direction and something needs to change.
So the policy question for this board now is, how should financial resources be prioritized? Are there nodes that we cannot allow to fail? What is your sense of priorities? We don't have money to pay for all of these urgent problems.
So at the moment, we want the funds, right? You need the money. So where's the money? So government kind of supplies some money. A lot of, private sectors, some are sitting here, you have some money. But now you need a really coordinated, centralized efforts.
Hotels will be experiencing, crippling losses doing that. And we know that the hotel business in itself makes up 5% of the GDP.
Governments need to be willing to do things that are out of their historical perspective, or for the most part, it's really a war footing that we need to be on.
We shouldn't underestimate the power of entrepreneurship. We need to escalate that, whether it's through the government's helping with tax breaks or subsidies of that nature to increase manufacturing of those types of products. It can happen quickly. A Marshall-type plan, don't mean to say that exactly, but a Marshall plan that can go into effect can stimulate change very quickly.
The CAPS pandemic was catastrophic. And as we've said, the impact of a severe pandemic is not only a result of the disease itself, but really the cascading economic and societal consequences that would follow. Now, we don't want to give you the impression that traditional public health measures aren't valuable, because they absolutely are. In fact, in the 200-some outbreaks that WHO responds to each year, interventions such as isolation of the sick, social distancing, disease surveillance, really do help to interrupt the spread of disease and control epidemics before they become pandemics. But in a severe, fast-moving pandemic, it may not be possible to contain the spread through these kinds of traditional measures. And as we saw in the scenario, there's a limit to what government, NGOs, and global business can do on the fly to stop a widespread and lethal pandemic. That's why prior planning and promotion of routine public-private cooperation in advance of the next pandemic is really critical. So you dealt with four serious international policy challenges today, but in an actual pandemic, there would be many more. In the exercise, the board wrestled with a series of very difficult problems, and you did a terrific job with no ability to prepare and a really fast-paced and complex set of issues. But assuming we do have a few years to prepare, what should we do to prevent this from becoming a reality? In advance of the exercise today, we drafted a list of actions that we think would start to move us in the right direction. And now that you participated in the exercise, we really want to seek your input on other things we could do to be better prepared. Our initial suggestions are these. First, global business should recognize the economic burden of pandemics and really fight for stronger preparedness. Business leaders and their shareholders could actively engage with governments and advocate for increased resources for pandemic preparedness. Second, governments and businesses should plan now for how corporate capabilities could be used for a large-scale pandemic. Industry assets, if swiftly and appropriately deployed, really could help to save lives and reduce economic losses. So governments could work now to identify the most critical areas of need and reach out to industry players with the goal of finalizing agreements in advance of a large pandemic. Third, we think industry and national governments should work with WHO to enhance internationally held stockpiles of MCMs and personal protective equipment so that it could be equitably distributed during a large pandemic. The WHO's existing influenza vaccine virtual stockpile is a good model that could be expanded and augment WHO's ability to distribute vaccines, therapeutics, diagnostics, other PPE to countries in the greatest need. Countries that would have to support this effort through the provision of additional funding to WHO. Fourth, countries and global transportation companies, we believe, should work together to maintain travel and trade during a severe pandemic. I think you all agreed that travel and trade are essential to the global economy as well as to national and local economies, and they need to be maintained. But public-private cooperation is necessary in order to explore potential solutions to that really difficult problem. Fifth, governments should provide more resources and support for the development of surge manufacturing of vaccines, therapeutics, and diagnostics. Countries may need population-level supplies of safe and effective MCMs in a pandemic. So we're therefore really going to have the need to rapidly develop, manufacture, distribute, and dispense large quantities of MCMs. Countries with enough resources should make this more of a priority than they do today. Sixth, we should increase and reassess pandemic financial support. The World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, regional development banks, national governments, and foundations should explore ways to increase the availability of funds in a pandemic and ensure that they could be flexibly used when they're needed. And finally, governments in the private sector should assign a greater priority to developing methods to combat mis- and disinformation related to pandemic response. Governments will need to partner with traditional and social media in order to research and develop nimble approaches to countering misinformation. For their part, media companies, we believe, should commit to ensuring that authoritative messages are prioritized and really false messages are suppressed.
Alarming news emerging from social media companies today about the CAPS pandemic. Twitter and Facebook are reporting they've identified and deleted a disturbing number of accounts dedicated to spreading disinformation about the outbreak. For more on this, we go to our correspondent, Catalina Parks.
Chen, these accounts were created by several state-sponsored groups intending to sow political discord, and some individuals are seemingly seeking to gain financial advantages. Violence against healthcare workers and minority populations has been increasing. A recent riot highlights the real danger in these posts. Countries are reacting in different ways as to how best to manage the overwhelming amounts of dis- and misinformation circulating over the internet. In some cases, limited internet shutdowns are being implemented to quell panic.
Thank you, Catalina. For more on this, we are joined by experts on crisis communications and social media, Kevin McAleese and Sarah Lee.
To me, it is clear countries need to make strong efforts to manage both mis- and disinformation. We know social media companies are working around the clock to combat these disinformation campaigns. The task of identifying every bad actor is immense. And experts agree that new disinformation campaigns are being generated every day. This is a huge problem that's going to keep us from ending the pandemic and might even lead to the fall of governments, as we saw in the Arab Spring. If the solution means controlling and reducing access to information, I think it's the right choice.
I agree with Kevin. This is a big problem and doesn't even account for the massive amounts of misinformation being generated by legitimate users about the pandemic. But it's not just trolls who are spreading the fake news. It's often political leaders themselves. Who's to judge what's real or not? Would we trust every government to separate truth from lies?
I think this is more than just keeping the bad information out. It's also about making sure real public health information reaches the public. News is found from outlets other than social media. News organizations, public health groups, and companies need to help people take the right actions to protect themselves by promoting accurate, real information about the outbreak.
Most likely virus to cause the most damage to humanity And I'm going to let any one of you who wants to answer this do so. No.
Thanks, Michael. And I wish the narrative would have come up on the video coming through, because what's called out in that narrative is a sense of urgency to address this problem. I mean, there are still 650,000 people around the world dying every single year from seasonal influenza. And if we take that scenario that Bill Gates and the Gates Foundation funded from the Institute for Disease Modeling that says if we had another outbreak like a pandemic virus today, what we saw in 1918, in that 6-month time period, we would have 33 million people dead. And not only that, that virus would have been seeded all around the globe. And 2 months after that, our best technologies to make vaccines would start releasing vaccines. And so we're still behind the gun on the tools we use to make the vaccines. We have some reasonable vaccine foundations, and we can make them better by adding adjuvants or high-dose vaccines that are not fully utilized. And a lot of parts around the world don't have access to the vaccines at all. And so I think that the sense of urgency needs to be there, Michael, but also the fact that we need to leverage the tools we have and at the same time envision what that universal flu vaccine is in a very rapid, urgent pace to get there.
So as part of my life, I teach at Stanford, and people use this word in Silicon Valley, which I mostly hate, but I'm going to use it now, disruption. Why don't we blow this system up? I mean, obviously we can't just turn off the spigot on the system we have and then say, hey, everyone in the world should get this new vaccine we haven't given to anyone yet. But there must be some way that we grow vaccines mostly in eggs, the way we did in 1947. I mean, we live in a world where I can download whatever song I want onto my phone at command, and we grow vaccines the way we did 70 years ago. What is going on with that, Peggy?
I think I can talk on my own.
I never knew that about you.
Well, I think it certainly is the case that we are behind where we have to be in terms of the urgency of this threat and how we're harnessing advances in science and technology and how we're mobilizing as a society to also recognize the magnitude and scale of the problem before us. Clearly, disruption comes with uncertainty, and it comes with uncertainty on many levels. Uncertainty within the scientific community and how we do science, regulatory uncertainty, which I know something about, and also uncertainty about adoption and access and all of that. I think one of the things is, and I think hopefully one of the messages coming out of this panel is that it's time to stop talking, it's time to act, and we've talked about these issues for a very long time, and that has taken the place of action sometimes, I think. But in terms of the why we're still growing it mainly in eggs, I think, a part of it is that it's just the way we've always done it. It's the way we know we'll get some kind of vaccine out into the marketplace. And there's always been the hope that in the meantime, other work will be going on and we'll have the breakthrough and the aha moment when we have a universal vaccine. Clearly that is not going to happen. I think it's also that we haven't had this sense of urgency.
Do we need to have lots of people die for that sense of urgency to occur?
Well, the incredible thing is that lots of people do die every year, and yet we aren't mobilizing. I would have to say, to be more positive, since I can't really answer the question of why is it taking us so long, because I think it shouldn't have, and there really is not a good excuse. The science has had to move forward. Gaps in the science still persist, including our understandings about immune protection, in addition to understanding the nature of this particular virus, which has its complexities. Certainly part of the problem has been that it's much safer for a company to just keep doing what it's doing than to try to do something new. But it's also, I think, we haven't funded all the work that needs to be done. And on an optimistic note, there's a lot going on now. And Tony is leading efforts, and there are other efforts, Gates Foundation, the European Union Research Horizon 2020, many other activities as well. but we're also not very good at collaboration, and I think that needs to be addressed. We need to start sharing knowledge. We need a roadmap for research that really we follow, we identify what do we know, where are the gaps, how can we fill those gaps. We need to identify what are the ruts that we're stuck in that we have to get out of, and how are we going to use all the capabilities in science and technology today and the energy of our society and the scientific community to get the job done.
First, a vaccine that actually worked, using unproven technology. But they also needed it now.
When I first heard the news, I thought I misheard. What is the efficacy? And then they told me 95.6. And I sat down and I took a glass of wine. This is when the emotions really came out. And I had tears in my eyes.
So when you say you push the team, what did you ask of them?
But what about those who say that's not enough blood to do all the tests that need to be done, especially if someone's very sick and you're trying to figure out what it is?
Every time you create something new, there should be questions. And to me, that's a sign that you've actually done something that is transformative.
I asked them to make the impossible possible, basically. And when we do a development of vaccine, it usually takes 10 years. So I asked them, instead of 8 years, to do it in 8 months.
8 months.
In a stunning reversal of fortune, Elizabeth Holmes, once a Silicon Valley superstar, was sentenced to more than 11 years in prison on Friday. Holmes carried out a massive scheme to deceive the investors who put up nearly $1 billion in her biotech company, Theranos.
Along with that, there were concerns, well, they must have cut corners. This can't be safe.
Yes, and that was always the guiding principle. We will never cut corners.
Hey there. Is this seat taken?
You guys would have been happy it was 50 to 70% effective, and it was
95.6%.
95.6. All right, I'm a Pfizer girl, just saying. I'm not just saying that because you're here.
Brought to you by Pfizer.
Have you taken the vaccine, sir?
No, I haven't taken it yet.
They were developed so quickly. What do you tell those folks who might be saying, well, I'm going to wait a few months before I get this one?
The decision not to vaccinate will not affect only your health or your life. Unfortunately, it will affect the lives of others and likely the lives of the people you love the most.
I also want to thank Albert Bourla, Pfizer's CEO and chairman, for joining me today. We've gotten to know each other over the last few months. He's really stepped up at this critical stage.
You have not yet had your shot. When do you plan to get it?
Sooner I can, I will.
I want to thank Pfizer and its CEO, Albert. Albert's been a good friend and he's been helpful.
Today's announcement with the U.S. government gets us closer to our goal.
You said it was 100% effective, then 90%, then 70%.
95.6%.
Why did you keep that secret?
Have a nice day. Mr. President, I want to thank you for your leadership and partnership.
Are you not ashamed of what you've done in the last couple of years? Do you have any apologies to the public, sir?
Of course, all of this work to increase supply and distribution will mean nothing if people are not willing to show up and roll up their sleeves to be vaccinated. The collaboration we are establishing with the vaccine partnership will grow even deeper over the next 4 years.
This is a case of life and death.
Mutating COVID?
Well, that is not what we say to the public. No, don't tell anyone this building. You probably shouldn't tell anyone. You probably shouldn't tell anyone. Okay? We're exploring, like, now, you know how the virus keeps mutating?
Yeah.
Well, one of the things we're exploring is, like, why don't we just mutate it ourselves so we could create unpredictably develop new vaccines, right? So we have to do that. If we're going to do that, though, there's a risk of, like, as you could imagine, no one wants to be having a pharma company mutating viruses. You have to be, like, very controlled to make sure that this virus that you mutate doesn't create something that, like, you know, goes everywhere.
Something crazy.
Is the way that the virus started and moving on. To be honest, like it makes no sense if this virus popped out of nowhere. Like,
yeah, I know.
Meet Jordan Tristan Walker.
a director of research and development strategic operations and mRNA scientific planning at Pfizer.
It sounds like gain of function to me.
I don't know, it's a little bit different. I think it's different. It's like it's definitely not gain of function.
It sounds like it is. I mean, it's okay.
No, directed evolution is very different. Well, you're not supposed to do gain of function research with the viruses. They recommend not. But you do these selected directional mutations to try to see if you can make more potent.
Yeah.
So there is research ongoing about that. I don't know how that's going to work. There might not be any more outbreaks because Jesus Christ.
The gentleman seems to have absolutely no moral compass at all.
I think a revolving door for all government officials. It's pretty good for the industry, to be honest.
Yeah.
It's bad for everyone else in America.
Why is it bad for everybody else?
Because if the regulators who have to approve our drugs know that once they stop being regulated, they want to come work for the company, they're not going to be as hard for the company. They're never doing their job.
If this is the quality of individuals within Pfizer that are making these huge decisions that risk global public health, it's profoundly corrupt.
Is brought to you by Pfizer. CBS Health Watch sponsored by Pfizer. Anderson Cooper 360. Brought to you by Pfizer.
ABC News Nightline. Brought to you by Pfizer.
Making a difference. Brought to you by Pfizer. CNN Tonight. Brought to you by Pfizer. Early Start. Brought to you by Pfizer. Friday night on Aaron Burnett Out Front. Brought to you by Pfizer. This Week with George Stephanopoulos is brought to you by Pfizer.
This weather report brought to you by Pfizer.
Today's countdown to the royal wedding is brought to you by Pfizer.
And now a CBS Sports Update brought to you by Pfizer.
Meet the Press Data Download. Brought to you by Pfizer.
This portion of CBS This Morning sponsored by Pfizer.
On how to find the hidden sugars in the American family diet. Sponsored by Pfizer.
Holy heck. Okay, so yes, for those who didn't watch the first time, after the Project Veritas expose of Jordan Walker saying we at Pfizer are essentially doing gain of function, we're making viruses more deadly, we're calling it directed evolution because we are God. No, he didn't say the last part, but he did say directed evolution. I read the press release from last Friday that Pfizer released at 8 p.m. after the news day was over, and it categorically said the opposite. And everyone on that set should know that it said the opposite, and that was what was so disturbing and stunning. It essentially said, yes, we are doing gain of function. We're doing gain of function with our collaborators, and as you and I have discussed, they didn't say who those were. They could be, the Global Church of Satan, they could be China, and just like BioNTech is in an MOU with China, just like this whole injection has been rolled out with Fosun Pharmaceuticals, which is a Chinese Communist Party entity, and China is building the manufacturing plants or built them in the distribution network. But they literally said we're doing it. It's a lot of countries are doing it, and it's good. Like, that was their position. And I've been very depressed ever since Friday, because what that means, as I said to you then, with PR, if there's something good to say, you say it. If there's a denial that the world is waiting for, no, we would never hurt you again. We would never hurt you the way the Wuhan lab intentionally or not hurt you. We know gain of function experimentation is illegal. We would never take the risk of unleashing another horrible virus on the world, that can't be controlled. The next one may be worse. No one would ever do that. They're saying the opposite. They're saying it's true, we're proud of it. We're not going to name our collaborators. They also speak of partners, as I recall. Also unnamed, not American necessarily. And remember, Pfizer and BioNTech are not American companies. They are not German companies. They are partnerships with the Chinese Communist Party. And they're global partnerships with the Chinese Communist Party. So those people, I couldn't process it the first time around, because they were, it's like 1984, where war is peace and lies are truth, and work makes you free, 1941 in that case, but in which there's a public document in which Pfizer said, yes, we're doing gain of function. the reason I'm so scared by that is it means that Pfizer has no expectation of having to defend that. Whoever's behind it is so powerful that they would rather kind of get everyone used to the idea that they're doing gain of function, that we're helpless to stop them, essentially, is how I read that. And there's no recourse. And what is happening now, which is very disturbing, is it's like computer effects, but for speech, in which I mean that these spokespeople from the farm industry are going on the media saying they didn't mean to hurt anyone. They don't hurt anyone. They're not doing gain of function. They're not doing gain of function. And they anticipate that you'll forget the actual press release, the formal public document saying we're doing gain of function from Pfizer. And instead you'll remember this guy on Fox who's invested in pharmaceuticals saying no gain of function, no gain of function. And that, unfortunately, is how human memory works. I mean, that's why it's propaganda. And you know very well that repetition, people can believe something that never happened. And they'll end up believing, of course, Pfizer doesn't do gain of function, but Pfizer said they did.
Real quickly, the book is up. How many copies has the book sold in the book? This is self-published by your group.
Yes.
How many copies has it sold, and where are we on the bestseller list?
It's an absolute miracle, thanks to all of you out there and the people you're gifting, as well as word of mouth, because people know these lying liars are lying to them, and this book tells the truth. So it's the War Room Daily Clout, Pfizer Documents Research Analysis ebook, and we published it, and we just passed the 10,000, coming up to 11,000 copies mark, which in like 10 days, which is absolutely unheard of. Solid nonfiction bestseller, even in the midst of all kinds of censorship. And we're in the top 25 or so on the Amazon bestseller list, even in movies.
The World Health Organization, the death rate from the coronavirus is rising.
3.4% is higher.
Twice as deadly as previous estimates.
3.4%.
A state of emergency.
Well, I think the 3.4% is really a false number. Based on a lot of conversations with a lot of people that do this, I think the number is way under 1%.
So to fact check, the World Health Organization says the coronavirus death rate is 3.4%.
President Trump lies that the World Health Organization is wrong.
The number is 3.4%.
3.4% is what it's being reported around the world. Making it deadlier. So much death.
The death rate.
The percentage is 3.4%. And no hunch from the president can change that.
Trump lied about the most recent World Health Organization estimate that the global death rate of coronavirus is 3.4%.
The 3.4% death rate was wrong, and WHO data later updated it to
a fraction of 1%.
Let's go back into history.
Trump has a hunch that the death rate is lower than 1%.
Way under 1%.
Way under 1%.
Will someone put a mozzarella stick in his stupid hole?
Trump lied to viewers about the mortality rate.
Way under 1%.
False information.
He's spreading disinformation.
Misinformation and dangerous disinformation.
If you're president of the United States, you have the world's greatest scientists at your disposal. You listen to them.
Leading scientists, including Dr. Fauci, wrote in the New England Journal of Medicine that the death rate could be considerably less than 1%.
Way under 1%.
Why are you going on national television and contradicting experts based on a hunch?
His fake hunch with some fake math. The president somehow thinks it could be lower than 1% based on nothing.
Based on a lot of conversations with a lot of people that do this.
Outright lies, contradicting health officials on fatality rates.
It's not a time for Donald Trump to be calling into cable shows. It's a time for the CDC.
What is CDC's best estimate of the fatality rate?
It's somewhere between 0.5% and 1%.
A fraction of 1%.
The president is spreading false information.
Information discarding what the health professionals are saying.
Outright bogus information.
Science is not based on hunches.
A hunch about what he thinks is going on.
Instead of trusting information from doctors and scientists,
he has a hunch.
Hunch.
A hunch.
It's not a time for Donald Trump's hunches. It's a time for science. It's a time for doctors.
Welcome, Dr. Jay Bhattacharya.
My hypothesis
my hunch
was it's likely to be less deadly than the World Health Organization was saying.
3.4%.
There's no way that was true.
Really false number.
This is why I ran the study in April of 2020.
And what did you discover?
The infection fatality rate was 0.2%.
Way under 1%.
Trump continues to contradict and downplay all things coronavirus.
The president appearing to contradict medical experts on the mortality rate of the virus.
Personally, I would say the number is way under 1%.
Later on CNN.
Our estimates are probably pretty inflated.
Very high, because the easy cases, they don't report to doctors or the hospital in many cases. So
initially, WHO released estimates of 3.4%.
Really a false number.
The true infection fatality rate is likely to be far, far less.
Way under 1%.
It could be in the range of a seasonal influenza.
A fraction of 1%. This is just my hunch.
He is spreading misinformation and disinformation.
You can even call it information.
An outbreak of sketchy information coming from the president.
He's using a hunch instead of listening to the Global Authority on Public Health.
A hunch.
There's a lot to be concerned about.
His hunch.
A hunch.
Hunches.
Just my hunch.
His hunch.
His hunch.
My hunch. Based on a lot of conversations with a lot of people. That's not what you want for the American people.
A hunch.
I think, in retrospect, those quotes are going to look even more damning.
Sometimes you have to laugh to keep from crying.
A pandemic of misinformation.
To put out misinformation.
Spreading false information. The disinformation.
Falsehoods.
Wrong and misleading information.
Misleading.
Misinformation and misinformation.
Misinformation. Just unspeakably reckless. It's totally reckless.
It's dangerous to have conflicting messages out there.
That is very dangerous.
How dangerous is it? Really dangerous.
What is the danger?
I think we're in a very dangerous period.
Natalie Winter's great compilation there. Natalie, Daily Mail is reporting today, it's a new study out. Remember, we told at one time 30% of the deaths related to COVID, or people went with COVID, 30% were directly related to the virus. Now, upon further review on the field, they've changed that to 99% of the deaths, I guess, had nothing to do with it. Let's talk about that first, Roy. Talk about your new exclusive that you got for us.
Sure, and remember, it's 99% of the countrywide 324 deaths, and that is the number that basically they are using that predated the mass rollout of these mandates on college campuses, studios, hospitals, various VA centers. But Steve, don't worry, because the CDC, and I think this dovetails quite nicely with the video that you just played, the CDC has come out and told the mainstream media that they have no plans to reinstitute lockdowns or mandates. And of course, all of the fact checkers, the factcheck.orgs of the world, have similarly come out with their stories, calling all of the segments we've done on War Room and Alex Jones and InfoWars, highlighting this very alarming trend, as you guessed it, conspiracy theories and misinformation. So they're already up to their same old tricks, but I'm of course kidding when I say that should make you rest easy, because frankly, I think the fact that they're doubling down and the fact that the CDC is even commenting on this, saying they're not going to institute lockdown, should be the ultimate red flag. And just to dive deep real quick on that Daily Mail story that you're talking about. So that was the week, like I said, leading up to basically the mainstream media playing nonstop, vamping the airwaves, talking about COVID-19, telling you to start wearing your mask again, all of this talk about boosters being needed, being mandated potentially. But if you really dig down into the data, like that headline shows, just 1.7% of the, like I said, 324 people countrywide who died with COVID-19 in their system, 1.7% were identified as COVID being actually the primary cause. The rest just died with COVID, which that was a very important distinction that was often overlooked by the mainstream media last iteration of the lockdowns. And I think the other key point to stress here is, of course, that during the COVID-19 pandemic, and I use that term lightly, but back when we were actually locked down, the numbers that you saw of cases that were actually, or rather deaths that were due to COVID-19 hovered around the 30% range. That was where they sort of got their justification for these obviously ineffective mandates and lockdowns. So even if you juxtapose this 1% number with the previously kind of establishment sanctioned 30% number, there's absolutely no way that you could justify it. And I think, frankly, the most important number that has been left out of this entire discussion is the fact that Pfizer's profits are down somewhere in the 93 percentile. Moderna, I think, is around 92 to 94. And I think if you really want to get to the data, the statistic, the standards that are really the reason why we're seeing a lot of this lockdown talk reemerge, it has to do more so with those numbers and those trends than it does actual COVID-19 cases.
Of course. Now, you've got another exclusive for us that I want you to get into, but it's just random. No coincidence. They have new vaccines for the new variant. They're going to drop September 15th when kids are back in school and everybody's back to work and everybody's want to go to a football game. In addition, Biden's just announced another, $1.5 billion, I think it is, to give to these guys to develop a new vaccine, like they haven't generated enough cash already. But talk to us how you've caught them out in their lies, because you went back to the math and the purchase orders and all this. Walk us through what's actually happening, not the spin the media's putting on it, but what's really going on with where money's being spent, ma'am.
Sure. Well, even if you go a step further, if you look at a lot of the news and press releases coming out of the World Health Organization, you'll see that not only about 2 days ago did they just launch a new coalition with civil society groups. Those are the sort of Gates Foundations, the philanthropic organizations of the world to coalesce and really work particularly on health and pandemic prevention. So no conspiracies, no coincidences there. They also just, of course, doubled down on their digital health efforts. That's, of course, kind of the vaccine passport, digital identity type stuff. But specifically, we like to come with our evidence, our receipts in this case, because, of course, the government, in conjunction with the mainstream media, is so good at spinning narratives. But in this case, the federal funds, the receipts don't lie. As you know, I came on the show, I think, last week to talk about how the DOD and the VA had begun procuring COVID-19 testing equipment and other forms of PPE, as well as enforcing COVID-19 regulations on federal contractors again. Not just for contracts that are starting now, but contracts that are starting September, October of this year that are set to expire in 2028. But just this weekend, I uncovered a new batch of contracts, this time coming, I would argue almost more concerningly, from the Department of Health and Human Services that are set to begin in September of this year. And you guessed it, conclude in 2025, just after President Trump will have been sworn in, assuming they don't try to use mail-in ballots to make that a likely outcome an impossibility. But this contract shows that they're now giving millions of dollars to a firm that specializes in public health emergencies, specifically COVID-19 response and surveillance. And if you look into the grant and what exactly they're receiving the money for, it's for COVID-19 measures, for COVID-19 response. So again, this is, I think, one of the most effective ways to call them out, because you can't lie what they're using our taxpayer dollars to fund in terms of the COVID-19 equipment.
I'm going to get into this in a second about the forcing Biden to shut down his own regime. But here's what's interesting. They're planning out years on this. I think you report the other day is 2028, 2025. You got Biden giving them $1.5 billion for the research that, Naomi Wolf has shown, was kind of a test case and should have been called off. They are bound and determined to think long range on this and to use this as some sort of, but because remember, emergency measures just got pulled off in May, and they're already starting to think 2, 3, 4, 5 years down range, Natalie.
They always like to say America thinks in years and 4-term election cycles, and the Chinese Communist Party thinks in decades. But I think we really should add the establishment, and particularly in this case, the Democratic Party, to that, because I think they really have identified COVID-19, but not even just COVID-19 itself, but the concept of public health, the concept of these sort of constructed social crises, whether it's a pandemic, whether it's climate change, whether it's racism, you name it, is sort of giving them the pretext to, I think, effectuate and put into practice a lot of these policies that they've been looking to implement in the United States for a very long time. But I don't think we even need to constrict or restrict our sample size on this to the United States, because I really think it's about the bigger picture here. It's about really what the agenda of the United Nations type groups are, the World Economic Forum type groups are. And remember, like I said last week, their goal, the year that they really focus on, the Chinese Communist Party too, is 2030. And I really think that's one of the key reasons why they don't want Donald Trump back in office. And if you really look at a lot of the plans that the WEF, the UN, all these globalist groups have launched and set to roll out, they think in decades, just like the Chinese Communist Party does. And nowhere did the American people ever sign on to agree with any of these sustainable development goals. But that's precisely the point. They don't care, just like the Biden regime doesn't care if they're going to use your taxpayer dollars to give more COVID-19 contracts and lock down this country. I think it's an agenda that is much larger than just Joe Biden, though he is an instrumental figure. And I think people should be very concerned because the first iteration of the COVID-19 pandemic we had, there was no WHO pandemic treaty, right? So, and thank God we had Donald Trump in office. But the second time, now we're going to have Joe Biden again. And even more concerningly, we have the WHO pandemic treaty. So we have even less autonomy over what we want to do within the barely existing borders of the United States because the WHO has a much larger say.
Natalie, where do people go to get your content?
Natalie G. Winters on all platforms, and make sure you sign up for the warroom.org newsletter to get these exclusives.
She warned us